Hello, this is Sondra Oster, Baras, bringing you a few words of Bible from the heart of Biblical Israel. This week's Torah portion is actually a double portion, Vayakhel, Pikudei, and it opens with the word Vayakhel, which means gathered. And it begins, it's of course the first word of this week's Torah portion that begins in chapter 35. And Moses gathered the entire congregation of the children of Israel, and he said to them, now, I'm going to, in a minute, tell you what he talked about, but the first three verses of this week's Torah portion is almost as if it's a completely separate issue. The Torah portion before, last week, we read the whole story of the golden calf. The very end of the Torah portion is with Moses coming down from Sinai with the second tablets with the 10 Commandments written on them. And when he comes down, we have a description of intense holiness that is reflecting off his face. And you get a sense here that there's a distance between Moses and the nation, that he has come back to earth, so to speak. He has come down back to the nation. And there's this incredible shining and perhaps even a mask that he's wearing. And there's really a real difference between Moses, this amazing spiritual being, and the rest of the nation. So first of all, we have to see that as the context. There's a distance there. And with the beginning of this Torah portion, Moses is attempting to correct that distance. So the first thing he does is he gathers the nation around him, as if to say, yes, I just came down from Sinai. I have gone through a very holy experience. I have spoken directly to God. I have spent 40 days and 40 nights on this mountain, and I have not eaten or I have not drunk. So clearly he's had an extra physical kind of, out-of-body experience, or whatever you want to call it. It's been something very different. But it's very important for him to connect to the nation, because that is his job, and that is what the nation needs. Especially after this period that we're going through is a correction of the sin of the golden calf, which came in part from the fact that Moses seemed to have been delayed, and the nation is at a loss without their leader Moses. So here, Moses' first act then is to gather the nation around him. It's also very interesting that this is a very unique verb that is used here, that he gathered them. It doesn't just say, and Moses spoke to the nation. In other words, he came down from Mount Sinai and he spoke to the nation. There is something else going on here. He's gathering them, all the nation, all the congregation of the people of Israel. So it's important for him, as he gives these instructions, that the nation is united. And this, of course, is a theme that is very, very strong within Judaism from this time till today. The importance of unity, the importance of standing together as we worship, but standing together in general, looking out for one another, standing shoulder to shoulder as we deal with both good times and bad. And you have this sense coming from this word, what Moses is doing now is he's gathering the nation around them so they all stand. So he's gathering them so that they will be united, but he's also gathering them in front of him so that he can close that distance that seems to have been, opened as he came down from Sinai and rejoined the nation. But the next thing that's interesting, and these first three verses, in many ways, have absolutely nothing to do with the rest of the Torah portion. The rest of the Torah portion takes us back to the instructions of building the tabernacle that we read in the two Torah portions a few weeks ago, first Truma and then Titzavet, when we learned about the instructions to build the tabernacle, exactly the various vessels, the structure itself, how it is built, the size, the materials, everything. We then learned 2 weeks ago about the various garments of the high priest and all the various things that the high priest is involved with. And now we're beginning a section which will take us to the end of the book of Exodus, which is the actual implementation of all those various instructions that we read initially. And they will now, and for between now and the end of the book of Exodus, they will actually be building the tabernacle. But here in these first three verses, what is Moses actually telling them? He's not telling them anything about the tabernacle. He is saying, these are the things which the Lord has commanded you to do. 6 days you should do your work, and on the 7th day will be holy for you, a Sabbath day for the Lord. All who performs work will die. You should not light a fire in all of your settlements on the Sabbath day. What does this have to do with anything? And why is it that Moses chooses this one commandment? I mean, in a way, picture this. He's coming down with the second tablets, okay? They've already done the revelation at Sinai. He's bringing them the second tablet. So in a way, you could say maybe he's summarizing what's on those tablets, but he doesn't summarize what's on those tablets. He chooses one of the 10 commandments, the 10th commandment about Sabbath day. And he talks about that. And he doesn't say anything like, I'm choosing one commandment and reminding you of it. Okay, he's just saying this one thing. So I think, though, consistent with what we have studied now about Moses gathering the nation around him, the purpose of this is to give them a sense. Now they've gone through a very difficult time. God has forgiven them for the golden calf. He's come back. He now has a new set of tablets, and they're able to start over. What is the most important thing, what is Moses' message now to the nation? What will save them? What do they need to pay attention to more than anything else? 2 things. The first is Vayakhel, gathering. They have to stand together. They have to stand together as one. That will give them the strength to move forward. And number 2, they have to remember the Sabbath. Now, in many ways, it is the Sabbath day that more than any other commandment assists the nation of Israel to stand together. There's a very famous statement that was made by one of the early Zionist leaders of Israel, who said, more than Jews kept the Sabbath kept the Jews. The fact that the Jews kept the seventh day as a day of rest, that no matter what was going on around, when an entire civilization, wherever it was that they had been exiled to, and all civilizations were working on Saturday, the Jews said, no, I have to rest. I remember, for example, my father telling me stories of his father, of what he did when he first came to the United States, and every job made you work on Saturday. So he opened a butcher shop, a kosher butcher shop. He had no money. He was a subsistence, worker at best. But usually, if you think about it, people at the lower end of the economic scale, the last thing they're going to do is open their own business. Okay, they're going to want to get a job where they know they can get a steady salary. But that was not an option, because to go get a job in the early 20th century meant working on Saturday. And so Jews who wanted to keep the Sabbath were not able to get those jobs. There's a very interesting story about a man. He's actually a distant relative of one of my dear friends. And they called him Shabbos Friedman. Shabbos is the way you say in Yiddish or an American accent of Hebrew, the Shabbat, the Sabbath. Why? Because he was living in New York at the time, again, in the early parts of the 20th century, and he saw how Jews in droves were going to get jobs to make a living, and therefore they were abandoning the Sabbath. And he went out of his way to help people find jobs and to encourage them to not work on the Sabbath, because he, like so many throughout the generations, understood we must keep the Sabbath. It's not just a day of holiness between us and God. It's not just a day of rest that helps us. It's a day that unites us as a people. Because and this is something you'll see in Israel today. It doesn't matter how strict you are about your Sabbath observant. If you're Orthodox, if you're traditional, if you drive on Shabbat or you don't drive on Shabbat. Anybody who comes to Israel will know that in the state of Israel, Saturday is not an ordinary day. That Friday afternoon, the stores all shut, okay? And if actually there are tourists who complain and say, I tried to find a place to go out for eat Friday night, and it was very hard because there's so few places that are open Friday night. Yes, this is who we are. We are people who have kept the Sabbath, and in turn, the Sabbath have kept us. And I think specifically now, before we begin to go into all the instructions of building the tabernacle, in other cultures of the time, pagan cultures, what would unify the people? A temple. Everybody went to the temple. And I think what God and what Moses are trying to teach us here is, yes, the temple is important. It will be a focal point, but it is not the focal point. Temples come and temples go. Our focal point is something above any structure. It is our relationship with God. It is our relationship with each other as a people. And the best way to anchor both of those relationships is by keeping the Sabbath. So when Moses gathered the nation, the first thing he told them and reminded them of was the Sabbath. And in that vein, I wish every one of you Shabbat Shalom. Have a wonderful weekend.
I hope you enjoyed that film. And we have lots more film content and emails and articles that I'm sure you will enjoy as well. Check out our website at CFOIC.com and subscribe to our newsletter. You can do that right from the homepage. I know you will really enjoy the content that will land in your inbox on a regular basis. Hope to see you soon.